Welcome to the Academic Woman Amplified podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, tenured full professor, mom of three, and firm believer that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello there. Today we wrap up our 3 podcast series about qualitative research and publication with an interview with my friend and colleague, Maira Quintanilha. Maira was featured on our podcast in episode 35 back in the summer when we were talking about the path formerly known as traditional through academia. So if you'd like to hear Maira's whole backstory, how she grew up in Brazil and came to the University of Alberta and studied her PhD, did qualitative research in health sciences. If you want to hear that whole story of Maira's really interesting journey through academia and out of academia, go back and listen to that episode. But today, what Maira and I are talking about is the role of qualitative research in health sciences and what a lot of qualitative researchers get wrong when they're trying to design and publish their qualitative work. Not surprisingly, our conversation touches on the 2 previous podcast episodes about qualitative research. One of them, episode number 69, is my own personal story of a too long journey to publish an article off of my dissertation. So if you're interested in hearing some real truth about academic development and how long it takes to figure things out, then I tell that story in episode 69. And last week in episode 70, I talked about the 5 things you should do if and when your qualitative research article gets rejected. So today's interview with Maira really wraps a lot of those things up. We talk about rigor, we talk about writing, we talk about design, we talk about career paths and how you develop as a qualitative researcher. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with Maira Quintanilha. Okay, all right, so how did you get started in qualitative research? Like, what's your qualitative research origin story?
It started in my master's program. And at that point, I had just moved here to Canada from Brazil. And I started my master's with a project that had received funding. And it had a component where telephone interviews were conducted with principals of schools. It was about school nutrition. Mm-hmm. And it had a component that was planned as case studies with schools that had adopted the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for Children and Youth.
Okay.
And in all sincerity, as it often happens here, and I would assume that it happens in large institutions, sometimes when your supervisor has funding for a certain project and you are a master's student, you kind of land on that project and it's assigned or expected you will be carrying on certain duties in that project. And that is how I landed on qualitative research. But you can imagine at that point, so the project had been planned as case studies. Case studies, if you know qualitative research, don't tell anything about the methods and what you're going to do within case studies. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I knew I was going to conduct interviews and observations, but there was a lot of learning by doing at that point. I had a qualitative course that was far from a course I would wish anyone to have as their first introduction to qualitative methods. It wasn't very helpful. So I was trying to learn by reading and making decisions. And my supervisor was 100% quantitative at that point. And she gave me a lot of leeway to go and decide what I was going to do, which is wonderful. And it speaks to how much she trusted me and the relationship we had. but I didn't have the mentorship for qualitative methods at
Right.
that point. I loved it. I had so much fun. I said if I ever did a PhD, I wanted to do with qualitative methods and I wanted to do qualitative research. But that's how I landed on qualitative research to begin with.
So do you think that that happens a lot? Like that there's kind of a PI or a researcher and that person kind of knows that there should be something qualitative happening, but it's not kind of like fully fleshed out or designed? Like it sounds like a story I've heard before.
I think so. I think I come from a health sciences background. So I was doing a master's in nutrition and metabolism and at that point. And I can tell you for sure that for a lot of the qualitative researchers that I have met in health sciences, they often started in that way where it lands on their roster of responsibilities. If they're in grad school, there is, I would say, more of an expectation of learning the methodology and doing it right. But I have also seen research assistants and coordinators that all of a sudden need to carry on a qualitative piece of a larger grant or a small qualitative study that is part of mixed methods without much support. I think the granting agencies have in the past few years put more and more pressure for investigators to include qualitative methods. And now I think there is also more pressure to make those qualitative methods and the whole research more patient, community engaged and hearing the different voices and opinions. But I think very often what happens is that starts without the foundation and understanding why are you even doing qualitative research in the first place? And what type of questions do you ask when you're doing qualitative research? So I think you're 100% right in your observation. It's a story that repeats itself in my experience as well.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into, some of your solutions to that problem in a second. But I want to know a little bit. I mean, this about 2 weeks ago on the podcast, I was telling my story of how at first, when I was trying to publish my qualitative research, it took me a really long time to figure out how to express rigor and how to write up the methods. And then once I figured that out, everything got faster and my design got better. But at first, it was a real struggle. So I wonder, if you could share with us some stories about your attempts to or successful qualitative publications. Like, what did you find hard about, writing qualitative research, at the beginning?
Yes, absolutely. So the master's research that I brought up as how I landed in qualitative research, eventually it got published. But that publication process was one of those painful ones that are kind of like traumatic for your first experiencing. It was my first experience as a first author. And when I look back, and even as I was dealing with the revisions, I knew at that point that I didn't do everything I should have done to have a solid qualitative research. So there were things in my methods that the reviewers brought up that I simply couldn't do anymore. I didn't have the ethics, and I had a full-time job at that point. I couldn't go back to the schools, interview more people. So there were things that I realized that I had definitely not done properly.
Right.
However, there were things that I also realized that I had not written properly.
Yes.
So what ended up happening was relearning of what mattered when I was writing to publish and publishing that piece. And that's one of the things that I often emphasize with my clients. I think if anyone has done research in general, but also qualitative research, rarely, if ever, things are perfect.
Yes.
But you need to know how to write what you did well. And I knew my project had merit. I knew I had done it properly with the people that I had interviewed, and the findings were interesting and worth being out there. Yeah. So I tried to focus the writing on that, but that whole process of revisions was over a year long. And it got to a point that actually my supervisor said, if you want to give up, it's totally fine. But after a year, you're kind of like, no, if they haven't rejected me yet and they're giving me the chance to put this in this journal, I will keep trying. And eventually it was published. It's not a highly cited publication. And I think one of the reasons is what is not included there. So that was my first experience. That was 2012. You fast forward 2014, 15, when I was doing my PhD. One of the reasons I even embarked on the PhD journey was because when I got to meet with one of my co-supervisors, and she said, you will be working with Dr. Maria Mayan. Maria Mayan was the main book that I hang tight to. She was the author of the book that kind of saved my life during my master's. And I knew she was at the U of A. Mm-hmm. And I said, if I ever had a chance to work with her, I would do a PhD. So when that opportunity came along, I said yes, because I knew I would be having the mentorship and a supervisor who knew qualitative methods inside and out. And that was probably the life-changing experience for me, because I had a mentor, I had a community of practice within her research group, and I had so many people to challenge me, to teach me, and to help me grow as a qualitative researcher. So it made a huge difference. And, I had publications in my PhD that were easy breezy to publish because they were great. I had one that was really hard because my analysis wasn't done when I submitted my manuscript. And I got 2 rejections that didn't help me to realize that. But then I submitted again. And in that journal, one reviewer gave me probably 100 comments.
Wow.
That kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, it was one of those things where that person, and it was an open review process. So I know who the person was. And I'm so thankful to all the comments that reviewer made, because she made me realize that I was not done with my analysis and it was not clear what I was trying to say in my manuscript. So with her help and the 100 revisions that she made, I was able to work through them and publish that paper. So I have had different experiences, but at the end of the day, now what I think that I can say is, your qualitative research might not be perfect, but don't hold it back from trying to publish, because even that publication process might be what you need to refine your ideas, to get out of your soapbox and be like, what am I missing here? Like, thinking outside of the box and potentially being challenged by someone who doesn't know you, who doesn't know your work, who is outside of your research group, and that can actually tell like, you're missing this piece of the literature, or have you considered this? And all those things, if you embrace that, you can definitely move through the publication process in a more fluid and also in a more empowered way, versus feeling that, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm missing the mark here, which I think many qualitative researchers kind of suffer from that in a way.
Yeah. And I agree with you so much that it was the process of submitting for review and getting feedback that helped me design the next study better. Because I was like, that feedback was in the back of my head for the next moves I made in my qualitative research. And that really helped direct, okay, well, I have to make sure that I build into the study this, and that I write it up like this, so that I'm not falling into the same problems that I did in that kind of original article that I struggled for years, to get out.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's when the review process is good, right? When it's helpful. Yeah.
Yes. It might feel uncomfortable. I think it is uncomfortable most of the times, but it doesn't mean it's a type of discomfort that we need to embrace. And I think for qualitative researchers, it's a type of discomfort that leads to learning and being pushed to actually recognize what the areas that you might be lacking and that you need to study more or write better, but it's not a negative way. So we really need to learn how to move through that, kind of like being called out and feeling uncomfortable, and how do I move forward? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, and that's part of scholarly development, right? Like, and that
exactly.
scholarly development is never
Yeah.
done. Like, I think a lot of times
Mhm.
there's these like moments in the career path where it looks on paper like you finished something, right? Like you get the
Mhm.
PhD and you maybe did a postdoc and then you got tenure and then you got full. And it looks like there's these stopping points, but you forget that like there's never a stopping point. It's like one giant 30 years of
Mhm.
developing yourself and your ideas and your line of research. And so there's that room for growth and that putting your voice into the world so you can get feedback, taking up the feedback and doing better is part of that
Absolutely.
growth the whole way through, not just early in
Yeah,
the career.
I agree. I think it really aligns with some of the things you teach about, like even your mission and your
Yeah.
academic, like knowing what is your branding. And I think when you are a qualitative researcher, the publication process and the process of conducting the research, it really taps into a lot of that, like your vision for your career, your branding, your academic branding. And I think in many moments along the way, you have opportunities to reflect how those things are working together or potentially not no longer working together. So I think I'm not saying that all the areas of research don't have that, but I think due to the nature of qualitative research, the importance of the researcher
Yeah.
in that process, I almost feel that it needs to happen in tandem almost all the time in all phases of an academic career, especially for qualitative researchers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to ask you about, you have this background in health sciences research. So I wanted to kind of give you a chance to talk about how you see qualitative methods as like being important for health research and for health sciences.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's something that I often say and I make it clear because a lot of so I come from a health background. And what that brings to the table for me with what I did for my research is how I understood the importance of towing that line between social sciences and health sciences.
Yeah.
And the more comfortable I get with naming things, the more comfortable I get with saying this. At the end of the day, is learning to really juggle the power structures in both areas
Mm,
and recognizing that health sciences is still very much positivist and it's post-positivist. Like bench science still has a lot of not only funding but prestige. And I learned how to navigate conferences where I was
hmm,
doing something totally outside of everyone else or 95% of the people were doing and understanding and being okay with the fact that some of those people thought that I wasn't even doing research or what I'm
right.
doing is not science, right? But the reason why I feel super comfortable with that is because I think qualitative research has a huge role in improvement and in advancement in practice, in programs, in how patients are included in randomized controlled trials, etc., because you're listening to the human experience
Right.
and you are understanding how people make through the day. That's Michael Eger's book. He says at the end of the day, like qualitative research is really about understanding how people make through the day. And you can have a wonderful invention, so a drug that cures a certain disease, or you might come up with a vaccine for COVID-19 that
Mhm.
is perfect, but you will still have people for various reasons who will say no or who will reject that or who will choose something that may seem to you as the researcher as unimaginable because you're not really understanding the why behind
Right.
the number of people who are saying no or who are not adhering to something or who are rejecting what seems to be best for them.
Yeah.
So I think that's where in health sciences, from public health to clinical trials, qualitative researchers have that opportunity to step into their roles as people who are trying to use the methods properly, to shed light on things that are seemingly kind of like unreal or surreal, like what is happening here?
Right.
And when you really bring those stories to their forefront, I think they not only make health more inclusive and more equitable, give voice to people who are often voiceless or their voices are not heard, but you also have an opportunity to be more practical. So if you are pragmatic, like you have an opportunity to actually think about those solutions that are focused on what will work, because they will work for the people affected by the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
So that's why for health sciences, even though I understand, and I think most of us would say we sometimes struggle as qualitative researchers with the people that don't think we are even doing research, you need to also know within yourself what it means for you to be doing qualitative research and what it can mean for participants, for patients, for families, for communities. And I think the more I do it, the more comfortable I get with the people that don't believe on what I'm doing, because I know how powerful what I am doing is and what the level of changes in different spaces that it can bring about as well, that the research can bring about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that anybody listening to you would be excited by the kind of amount of like passion and excitement you bring to qualitative research. So I want to hear about what made you decide to create the Qualitative Research Blueprint, which is your course about qualitative research. Like, where did that desire to teach other people about it come from?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go too much into details of how I stepped outside of academia. Like a lot of people have probably heard my story here in your previous podcast episode, and I also talk about it on my website. But once I decided that I was going to teach an online course outside of academia, that it started with like, what do I teach? Like, do I teach focused ethnography or ethnography, like the methods that I have used? Do I teach community-based participatory research? Because that's what I also did. Do I focus on data analysis? And that was actually one day when I was working as a consultant and doing the writing for a professor. And they had done the COREQ checklist. And the COREQ stands for Consolidated Criteria for Reporting Qualitative Research. And it's a checklist of 32 items to help you write qualitative research in a way that satisfies what is expected, especially in health sciences.
Okay.
And the group had completed the COREQ 32 checklist, and that made it incredibly easier for me to write the findings and get it published. What the COREQ does, though, and I must say I was very resistant to the COREQ before, because I think it was too structured, and I was like, I never use it if you go to my PhD publications, I had no reference to that. So I was resistant before because I saw it as boxing and also as putting that positivist lens on qualitative work.
Right.
But what changed for me at that point was that I realized that that checklist really is about all the things that you should do and consider throughout the whole research process. Starting with who you are as a researcher, what is your training? What is your background? How diverse is the research team? And from there, it goes into the data analysis, who did what, how things were captured, how things were recorded. It really came to the whole idea of rigor. And the thing that I believe was my resistance to the COREQ before was because I felt that you were doing a checklist to publish when you were ready to publish. And what I wanted to do was to make rigor almost this embraced way of doing qualitative research that makes you feel more confident from designing through publishing, but also making you feel that like you're having fun doing that. You're not terrified about feeling this checklist at the end and realizing what you didn't do.
Mm.
So when I created Qualitative Research Blueprint, I had the COREQ at the back of my mind. I had the different areas who the researcher is and the worldview that that person is bringing to the table. And then we go through the methods, the methodologies, and then the methods and data analysis and writing. And I infused rigor throughout the whole course, but in a way that hopefully, and I think it delivers that message that don't be afraid of rigor and a checklist when you're publishing.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing qualitative research in a way that is rigorous, it probably means that you are following the tenets of qualitative inquiry, that you're considering the important things, that you're being strategic about what matters and about what you might need to let go for various reasons. And that's how the course came about. It is about rigor throughout the whole research, but we don't like delve into rigor in each module.
Right.
We just give you the tools and the information you need to ensure that you're being rigorous, because you're first recognizing who you are as a researcher. You are trying to identify your paradigm. What's your epistemology, your ontology? How do you see ethics and axiology in your research? And then you're moving through the methodologies, like, do I fall under ethnography? Am I doing ethnography? Or am I trying to push ethnography when I'm doing something else that is not an ethnographic study? So all those things are to help qualitative researchers to feel more comfortable with what they are doing and to also know what rigor looks like for them and how to describe that. So when they get to the publication, a COREQ checklist will not be something they will hate or just be terrified about, because they will be like, oh, I know I have all it takes to report my study because I did it all from the beginning and I thought about those things from the beginning. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. That's so good. Like, I feel like one of the things I like about this course, like what attracted me to it when you were building it and when we've talked about it before, and then now that I've seen, the kind of most recent version of it, is that rigor is like infused throughout and it's centralized. And I think that, like, for me personally, as a qualitative researcher, that was the missing piece. Like, that was the part that that even though I had learned the methodology and I had learned the methods and I understood positionality and I understood a lot, that, like, for some reason, and it might have been, I don't want to blame my training, because I actually feel like my training was top-notch, superior, excellent, wonderful training. But that doesn't necessarily mean that as you're, like, for example, designing like for me, like designing my dissertation, which was like the first big qualitative research project I designed, just because I was trained well and I kind of knew what I was doing, like, that doesn't mean that rigor was like central. And that's something that I really learned by trying to publish, by doing more publications. So, and by doing more studies. So, yeah.
Like, the people that have taken the course in the fall came with different levels of expertise, and some were associate professors, so tenured professors. And one of the things that we did was to have that open conversation about, in my area, if I say I'm doing phenomenology as it should be done, but I have a sample of 8 people, I don't get published in most journals. But I'm also not doing phenomenology enough to be published in a phenomenological journal.
Yeah.
So we had those challenging conversations of, okay, so how do you go about those things? How do you know what you're doing, but you also know that you have the pressure to publish. You need to get that published. And if you call that something else, it might not be a proper denomination of what you did. So we had a lot of discussions about what you can do and how to navigate those challenges in the process of conducting and writing qualitative research. And especially in the interdisciplinary fields, I had many social workers who were doing health-related research, how to navigate that. And when it was time to recognize that maybe you're trying to preach to the wrong audience, or potentially that it was time to embrace other methods that before you didn't think they were good enough for what you were doing. But as long as you know how to write them properly, they are probably going to give you better results in terms of where you can advance the area of study, where you can publish, where you can communicate to the right audience. So those discussions happen as well, because we know at the end of the day that, and that's how I teach in the course, that rigor has its side with the researcher, with how the research is done, so the participant side as well, and the reviewer side. And you can't control reviewer and participant, especially when publishing, you can't control reviewers. So we had a lot of discussions about how to move forward and be rigorous, understanding what is outside of your control as well.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned some of your students. Kind of the last question I have for you is, when people are listening to this podcast, enrollment for the Qualitative Research Blueprint is going to be open. And so I wanted to ask you, like, who do you want to fill this cohort with? Like, if you could call the ideal participants to you, you mentioned that you have people at all different kind of career levels in that fall cohort. So who do you want to have, in this group?
I wouldn't say a certain career level is what defines the people who are the ones who will make the most of the course. What I think is, if you're doing interdisciplinary research related to health somehow, or health research, and you are doing qualitative research, and sometimes in a silo or with very little support, and feeling that you want the mentorship to growth, you want to be challenged to take your research to the next level. And when I say take your research to the next level, it really means potentially like bringing new ideas, like getting that refreshed pair of eyes and new perspectives on your research, or that you're designing or trying to publish and you're stuck. And if you also need infusion of enthusiasm from someone who loves qualitative research and believes in what you can do with qualitative research for you, for your career, for your communities and participants, come and join the course. The course is definitely all-encompassing, from starting with your qualitative foundations to the writing. And the reason why I say come and join the course, no matter where you are in your qualitative research journey, from like writing a proposal to publishing, is also because of the nature of qualitative research. Even if you're publishing your study and you are doing what I did, trying to publish something that was not final with final analysis, you will have inside the course, in the QRB pathway, so the Qualitative Research Blueprint pathway, you will have things that will help you think about, okay, why is this not being written in a way that is resonating with my reviewer? And you can go back, because qualitative research is different from quantitative research in that sense. You can review your research questions. You can truly be critical of what paradigm am I putting in this, and how that is not actually how I'm writing it. So you can take that opportunity no matter where you are to make your research stronger. And I think that's why it was appealing to different career levels, because it gets to a point for most qualitative researchers where we fall into that, doing that for very long or not having enough support. And I think you almost lose a bit of your stamina. So for graduate students, it was refreshing and they were inspired by the possibilities. And I think for the people who came who were tenured professors, it gave them that perspective that we were talking about. It was like, how do I move through the difficulties that I have publishing this area? Or where am I going to go with my next project? What would be stronger here? And how can I make a bigger impact with the communities that I have? And that's something that I think speaks to the ideal person. You want to be feeling energized. You want your research to be stronger. You believe in your qualitative research, but you're also ready to like take that step where you feel like you are in a better position to advocate for your research, to apply for grants, to write what you have, and to advance your career. And I think it is definitely for anyone who is listening that felt, yes, I need that. You're welcome. And I'm biased, but I think you will love the course because it's a lot of fun and I love teaching it. So I am definitely biased. I will always admit to being biased because it is one of the things that
as qualitative
I'm biased.
We can admit
I am definitely biased.
Yes.
Yeah. I am
Great.
Subjective and biased here.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Well, it's so inspiring, and I love hearing your story and what you're doing to really help qualitative research get better, which is just better for humans. So it's very exciting. And we will have all the information that you need. If what Maira just said kind of calls to you, then the link to Qualitative Research Blueprint's enrollment page is in our show notes, and you can go and check it out.
Thank you, Kathy. And I hope to see some of you there for sure.
Yes. Awesome. Thank
you.
Listeners, I hope that you are just as inspired by Maira's enthusiasm and passion for qualitative research as I am. If her description of her course, the Qualitative Research Blueprint, is appealing to you, you think you might want to check it out, it sounds like just what you need, then I encourage you to follow the link in the show notes or in any of my emails from this past week about how you can enroll. When you enroll through my link, so the one you'll find in these show notes, the one that will come to you if you're on my email list, if you enroll with my link, I have a special bonus pack for you. It is a little bundle of 2 programs that I think will really help you propel your qualitative research and writing forward. The first one is really special. If you enroll in the Qualitative Research Blueprint using my link, then you are going to get my newest course. It's not even on the market yet. You're going to get it for free. It's called Writing Sprint Blueprint. And Writing Sprint Blueprint teaches you how to create and enact a writing sprint that's going to help you move your writing forward. So when you enroll in Qualitative Research Blueprint, you also get Writing Sprint Blueprint, and you're going to be the first ones to get it. The other little goodie I have for you in the bonus bundle for enrolling in Qualitative Research Blueprint is our very popular training, The Funding Formula. The Funding Formula is a training that teaches you how to ask for what you want and get it every time, particularly from your own institution. So whether you want to ask for funding for professional development, funding for research space, administrative help, anything that you want to ask for, the Funding Formula teaches my method for asking for that and getting it. It includes a template letter that you can alter for your funding request. And really, if you don't know how to do this, you have just been missing out on a lot of opportunities. So you definitely want to grab the Funding Formula, which is only available normally as a bonus to my Navigate enrollees, but I'm giving it away to anyone who enrolls in Qualitative Research Blueprint using my link. Enrollment is open until March 19th, so get in there so you can be part of Maira's next cohort. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time loving on yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you're feeling pulled in 1,000 directions and can't seem to carve out time to write, I've got a solution for you. Go grab my 10 ways to make time to write cheat sheet. Just go to kathymazak.com/podcast-time to learn my best quick tips for putting writing at the center of your career where it belongs. We'll link that up in the show notes. Just go to kathymazak.com/podcast-time.